Hi, this is Frank Todaro, and you're listening to the Geekcast Radio Network.
There is nothing wrong with your podcast player. Do not attempt to adjust the volume. Hello and welcome to Studio 2009. I'm, of course, TFG1 Mike. Joining me, as always, is Steve Megatron.
Hello.
Hello. This is our 20th episode, and on the 20s, or actually on the 5s, or whatever you want to call it, we have our podcast approach series where we interview podcast hosts, podcast listeners, usually a mixture of both. We usually try to find someone who has both listened to and or been a host of podcasts in the past. And today, our podcast approach guest, we welcome back for the third time to the Geekcast Radio Network, that guy who all gives us the nerd effect. It's Dustin VanCour. Hello, sir.
Hello.
Yes, you are here.
I am here. Or am I there? I could be anywhere.
Yeah, you could be.
I could be outside your window. You wouldn't even know it. Creep.
I don't see any drones with earrings around. I don't know. Anyway, getting started as a podcaster. When did you discover podcasts, and what was the first one you listened to?
When did I discover? I can't pinpoint a date, but what I can say is that I specifically remember getting started in, so a lot of us know a nice little website called Screw Attack from back in the day. Mm. And from there I discovered the podcast Side Scrollers, and that was kind of like my first real foray into podcasting, and listening to podcasts and stuff. Yeah, so that was really my first like big thing, listening to Craig and all those guys talk video games and stuff like that. Kind of was like my first real thing. I was like, holy shit, these are like guys that I used to listen to all the time. These were the guys I would have been friends with in elementary school and high school and all that stuff. So I kind of had like a connection with those guys.
Very cool, very cool. How long after you started listening did you want to start your own podcast?
Not very long. So most people know Nerd Effect and doing a handful of shows with you guys and Mike, but technically my very, very first podcast was back in like 2005, and it wasn't really my show. I was actually, this is going to be so obscure for everybody, but I did a stint for a year out in Burley, Idaho as a manager of a Radio Shack out there, and one of the guys who worked at my store was also a radio DJ for a country station out in Twin Falls. And he had a bunch of equipment down in his basement, and he's like, we should start a podcast, and we just called it the BS Cast for, BS. And we did. It was just literally an hour of us once a week just shooting the crap and not really having any sort of subject. We would just start, and he hosted it, so we just kind of rolled with him. And it was pretty funny. It was a good time for the short period that it ran.
Very cool, very cool. What was your plan in getting your podcast off the ground?
My plan was, well, first off, I was inspired by guys like you and Dodd and the Side Scroller guys. It was like, and so I think I did my very first podcast with Dodd, and it was regarding the Ninja Turtle series from the NES, and it was comparing the NES port of the actual arcade. And he reached out to me because he knew I actually owned the full arcade cabinet. And
do you still have it?
Yeah, I plan on being buried in that thing. I will have it fully converted into my casket, or at least pass it down to my daughter if she wants it. But I'm not selling it for nothing. So that was like my 5-year. That was like Dustin, age 7, life goal was to own that arcade machine. So, and here we are. I got it. I think I got my first real big like bonus check from a job that I was working, and I had it shipped from New Jersey, I think, off of an eBay sale for like $1,700.
Ooh.
And I have no regrets.
That's a long way.
Yeah, from New Jersey to Boise, Idaho, and it was shipped freight, so it came wrapped in like.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was wrapped in like big like extra thick Saran wrap and like a pallet and everything, and they dropped it off at my friend's house because she had a garage. So, and it sat there for 3 years until I could finally get it into a place that I bought.
There you go. Which do you prefer, audio or video podcasting, as a fan and as a producer?
I definitely prefer audio podcasts because when I primarily listen to them, I'm usually at work, so I can't really be bothered to be distracted too much. So, yeah, definitely audio as far as that goes. Okay.
So, what kind of setup did you have when you started podcasting, and what do you use now?
So when we first started podcasting, I had bought some really basic Behringer equipment. It was just a simple, because I knew there was going to be at least 4 of us. When the podcast first started out, it's always been me and my best friend Mason, and then the 2 other seats kind of just rotated as people weren't able to do the show anymore. So it initially started out with me, Mason, Zach, and my cousin Jake, and we had a blast doing that. And we started off with some simple equipment. We had a 4-mic Behringer mixer that was USB compatible, and we took it to my laptop. It had 4 Behringer condenser microphones, and I bought all the stands and everything. I funded the whole thing myself. And I knew it was just going to be for fun. I wasn't trying to get sponsorships or anything. This was literally the only reason I got started in this, was I knew it was going to be a great reason for all of us to hang out. Like if we had something scheduled that we could do and actually show up and do, that was going to be the thing. And the podcast was kind of our outlet for that, because at the time I was a new dad and I needed some time for myself whenever I could get it, like once a week, just to get out with my friends. And that was kind of it. So, whereas other people might go out to the bar or to a club, that's not really my thing. So, that was our thing, was the podcast.
Nice. So, if your equipment of any kind, whether it be headphones or microphone, breaks down, do you typically buy the same thing, or do you take that opportunity to upgrade to something better?
Thankfully, we've never really had anything like break on us. The only thing we've had broken on us was that original mixer. It lasted for 2 or 3 years, and then all of a sudden we started getting some really weird staticky feedback in one of the microphones. So to make up for that, in the meantime, until I could afford a new mixer, we just kind of hooked up a splitter to one of the mics and just ran 2 mics into one of the ports and didn't really have any issue with it. The only thing it just took away from you is the fact that you didn't have individual control over that one microphone. So if you're controlling one of them, you're controlling both. So that was really the only beef I had with it. But other than that, it was fine. Also had a 4-port headphone amplifier, so it was 1 to 4, so that each of us could have our own headset.
Nice.
And it was really, if you guys have seen any of the pictures I posted online, I've posted pictures of our setup before, and when I, not to make it sound depressing, but when I got divorced a few years back, I knew I wanted to do something more for myself. I was starting to make more money for myself, so I started to gradually make some upgrades. I bought 4 new mics. I bought a new mixer. It's a little bit bigger. It's still I think it's a 6-port microphone one now, and it's a Mackie. Really nice board.
Oh, nice.
And now we run that with our podcast. And what that'll do is it allows us to, we've had guests on the podcast actually physically show up to our podcast, and that actually allows us to hook up, more mics to the show if more people decide to show up. So, yeah. And I still have all the microphones. I haven't actually gotten rid of any of the equipment I've had over the years. I'm a bit of a hoarder when it comes to electronics, and it's probably not the greatest thing in the world. I still have my box to my PlayStation 4, which serves no purpose after the warranty, but it's just nice to have it, I guess.
I can see that.
But yeah, I just love that kind of thing. So I still have 4 spare mics just floating around if we actually need them. So I had my backpack. So we used to do the show not remotely. We didn't do it out of my house initially before the divorce. So what we would do is my office where I worked is owned by a friend of mine, and she let us use the conference room to run the podcast out of. And they had a big conference table that we could all just sit around and do the show from there, which also was great because if we had guests, we could invite them to the office and they could have a spot too. So it wasn't like, somebody sitting in the corner with a microphone in the corner of a living room trying to make room for the other people in the in the room. The one thing we've never done, surprisingly, is what you guys do, and that's we've never had a remote recording before. We've never had anybody like call in or do it over Skype or Discord or anything like that. Every podcast we've ever done was always done in person between the four of us.
Huh.
So, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is cool. I could never do that. I've done that a couple of times, and it is cool to do, but I'm already so scatterbrained, I can't sit here and look at you and focus on whatever topic. It's just too wacky for me. And it's funny with the headphones, because this is all your fault. The only
you
reason
got those JVCs?
Of course I do. Well,
nice.
See, here's the thing. So, again, as Dustin mentioned, for his stuff, there's pictures of me online, I think from 2014. You were raving about these JVC headphones, and the sound quality is the best, and this and that and whatever. Well, they lasted till about 2017, 2018, and then like around the ear and everything, it just all started falling apart and degrading. So I'm like, I gotta find these again. These are the only damn headphones I can really use because they encapsulate my entire ear on both sides. Like, I have all the cushioning. Bose can go to hell for all I care.
Bang for the buck. Those JVCs that we owned are absolutely hands down some of the best headphones I've ever owned. And JVC is not known for like high-end electronics. Like, they're like mid-level at best. Yeah. But for some reason, those headphones sounded so crystal clear and so perfect. And like you said, the ear cups were, you and I got gigantic heads. It's no fucking, secret. Yeah. I have a huge noggin. And those things fit around my ears and on the side of my head so comfy. It's like having musical pillows attached to the side of your head. Like, they were perfect. And I would put those headphones up against any $200 or $300 pair of I don't know about Bose necessarily, but definitely like Beats or something like that, and they would rock.
What's funny is I had, when we started the network, I started off with one of those $9 LabTech plug-in microphones, and it sounded like garbage. And then I bought a Logitech ClearChat Pro USB headset, and after buying that for like $30, because it had the microphone built in, it had the headphones, it was comfortable, all the settings were on the headphones. I had those for a number of years, and then I forget what happened. I think the padding on it rotted out, like just the fake leather that was on it.
Yeah, it's always the first to go.
I know, it rotted out, and I was like, oh man. And then the earphone part of it that extends, I think snapped. And I was like, well, these are junk. So I went and bought another pair at the store, which was a similar model, because I was pretty happy with them. And then and those lasted me, the first set lasted me about like 6 years, and then the second set lasted less, but it made it through multiple moves. I was sitting there during the virtual podcast movement last year, and Mackie happened to be the only one doing giveaways. Like, everybody else was like, oh, I'm going to toot my own horn for my network and for this, company. And Mackie was like, we're doing promotional stuff. We're giving away, different stuff every single day. And we're doing demonstrations of how to use the equipment. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know much about them. And I was like, I would love to win something. And if nothing else, I'm learning while I'm sitting there. So working from home, I was watching on one screen for the panel, and I'm doing my job on the other stuff. And you had to comment periodically, and I happened to win the first day of that. I won a like $200 or $300 headset.
Yeah, you did.
Headphones. And I was like, well, that's awesome, because mine had just broken and snapped. So it was quite funny on that. It had completely fallen apart, and then I won these headphones, and I just had to wait for those to show up. Well, then later in the week, I won their studio bundle, which has the studio speakers, the microphone, and one of the $100 headphones. So I'm actually not using the $300 ones right now because I'm waiting until these $100 ones disintegrate, which could be a while.
But the leather. So what's ironic about your story is that I also won a pair of like $200 Mackie headphones from an Instagram contest they were having.
That's awesome. Yeah, they're very generous, and their stuff is great. Like I'm very happy with it, but I still have my go-to microphone. At least right now, I use their microphone as like a backup if I need to use it somewhere else in the house, because I have this one mounted on a boom arm. I have a Blue Yeti, and I've had that since 2012, and it sounds quite honestly fine, so I don't have any reason to change it. But I have a backup of pretty much everything now, which is nice, and I didn't pay a dime.
Yeah, I'm using a Blue Yeti myself right now. I got it off of Woot, and I don't know if you know. Do you guys know what Woot is?
Yeah.
It was independent for a while, but then Amazon bought them. But they're like one of those bargain a day type places where they put up a new 24-hour bargain in like 8 different categories. One in electronics or computers is one of them, and they had the Midnight Blue Yeti one as a refurbish, and I wasn't about to pass that up, so that's
nice.
Nice.
That is awesome.
Yeah, and that's very cool. So, kind of jumping back onto our topics of questions here, did you think you'd be podcasting for as long as you have?
So, yes, I guess. Like I said, it was just kind of it was built as a reason to hang out. So even as now a half-time single dad, I still have 1 week off, and we try to use that Sunday of that week to record. We had recorded consistently up until about Mike actually pointed it out to me earlier today, and we haven't posted anything since May of last year.
You make it sound like I'm like poking a bear over here. No, I just wanted to make sure I had my information right.
No, it's fine. And if you go to our website, you'll even notice that before that we hadn't posted since November. So like it's not, we ran into some consistency issues at one point, and between parenting, and I was getting really backed up. Like I think I have a backlog of like 7 or 8 shows that I haven't edited or posted yet. And some of them are now so dated. I think some of them are from like E3 of 2019 and stuff like that. Like there's just stuff on there that I just never got around to editing and posting. And so that's just it. We just kind of ran into a wall there. And we have hopefully some plans to get it back up and running. Well, we started in 2013, and we were really consistent for a long time, and we've done a lot of cool stuff since then. During that time, we used to go to a lot of conventions locally.
As did we.
And so maybe as a podcast, I don't know did you guys get media passes all the time? Because those are the best.
Oh yeah, I got them like when I was in Michigan, I got them quite often. Not only for like Grand Con, but I got them for I think the one in Illinois, Chicago.
C2E2?
Yeah, I think I got passes for it, but I was moving at that point, so I couldn't go.
Oh right, yeah, that's right, yeah.
So there is a video element to our podcast, and that video element happens to be based around interviews that we do at conventions. So we do interviews with people we just kind of find fascinating or interesting at conventions. We'll find artists and writers and comic book publishers and stuff like that. We'll have conversations with them. Cosplayers. We're friends with a lot of local cosplayers, so I've done interviews with them. We've also interviewed some celebrities. My favorite one right now is the fact that I was able to interview Jake the Snake Roberts. at Cherry City Comic Con. That dude is the sweetest human being. Like, you would never guess it. But he let me hug him before the show. That was amazing, or before the interview. That was awesome. And he asked if I had any final requests before he had to go off and sign a book, and I just said, if you would do me the hugest favor in the world and just lay down a heel style promo on me right now, that would be amazing. And he's like, what was your name again? I was like, it's Dustin. And he went off for like 3 minutes straight of just like absolutely bashing me. It was amazing.
All right, would you do me a huge favor real quick? Could you, I don't know, maybe cut a promo on me real quick?
What's your name?
Dustin.
Okay. Get the fuck out of here. Dustin, you want to play with a snake. You want to touch it? You want to feel it? You want to hold it? Really? I don't think so. You see, Dustin, you like to play the game. Jake, you don't play. That's true.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, man.
I appreciate it.
But yeah,
That's awesome.
He's a really sweet guy. I've interviewed a couple of people from Stranger Things, The Walking Dead, and that was from Treasure Valley Comic Con when they came over to Boise and Nampa area. So yeah, that's like some of my favorite stuff, and that's just some of the stuff that this dumb little podcast has afforded us to do. We did a media thing for Chris Hardwick when he was doing a stand-up tour. Like, their media agency like reached out to me and said, hey, we see that you're an active podcast in the Boise area. He's going to be doing a stand-up show. Do you want some tickets to give away? And I was like, yeah. Yeah, like Chris Hardwick's like one of my big heroes. He's a big podcaster, and he's obviously a stand-up comedian and has a huge pop culture following and stuff. And and we gave away like 3 pairs of tickets to his stand-up show that he was having in town through Facebook. And at the time, he was doing At Midnight, which was a hilarious show on Comedy Central, if you ever can go find it in the archives. And so we did a hashtag thing where hashtag celebrity zombies or something like that, because it was in October, and people would make up like zombie names for celebrity or nerdy celebrities, like George Takei was one of them that won. Gory Gygax, just like these crazy names, and we just voted on which ones we thought were the best and gave the tickets away to those people. So stuff like that, like stuff I never thought in 1,000 years I'd ever be doing.
That's awesome, man. So how have your podcasting goals changed since you started compared to now?
So I like to think big, but at the same time right now, it's like the goals have changed in a way that they kind of rolled backwards, because right now it's just wanting to get the show back and starting again. But at its peak, I started having these like crazy ideas. Like, what if, like I started thinking of things like what Kevin Smith does, where he does like live stage shows where people participate and laugh and stuff like that. I was like, well, I don't think I would ever have the balls myself to do that. But I was like, what if there was like some like weird creative thing that I could do with that, where if I started somewhat of like like a nonprofit or something like that in town, that would, like, I would call it like the Boise Pod Garage or something like that, where people can come and like rent out studio space to do their podcast in. They can pay per session or per hour, whatever it takes, and then maybe have like some sort of like comedy club nighttime element to that too, where people could like stage a live podcast similar to like what Kevin Smith was doing. So, and then they could pay at the door, and we would take part of that to like pay for the space, and then they could take the other part of it as like a income for their show. So just stuff like that. Like, I was thinking really big, like into the future, but things obviously kind of came to the halt over the last year, and whether or not that's actually in the realm of reality for me might be another thing too. But that is a very lofty goal. I would like to travel more to more cons, like go to Emerald City Comic Con, Fan Expo, Rose City, all those bigger Comic Cons that surround the Boise area. We never really have like big comic conventions in Boise. The biggest one that we've had is Wizard World. They came here in 2018, promised they would be back, and then canceled the next year because they found out that the weekend that they were going to be here was the exact same weekend that San Diego was coming through, or was doing their convention. They didn't want to have to compete with that. So,
oh, jeez.
So that kind of put a damper on things, and they haven't been back since. They did this weird thing for everybody on the final day of the con where they said everybody gather at the stage at this time, and you know who the host of Wizard World is? Just Kato Kalin. He's the host of Wizard World. Like, he's the guy on the mic emceeing almost everything on the main stage, and it's hilarious. And he's actually a really cool guy. Like, I don't know how else to put it, but he has not lost an ounce of energy ever.
Interesting.
He announced to everybody that, yes, we've done a consensus. Yes, we'll be back next year. Yes, like, and everybody's like, woo! And then they never came back. So, thanks for nothing, Kato.
Oh, boy. Yeah, if you ever want to go to Emerald City, just let me know. We can do something, because I'm 3 hours away from Seattle, so...
Aren't you up at your Vancouver area, right?
Yeah, I'm 3 hours south of Seattle.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for something in the Denver area. I'm like 50 minutes from Denver.
There you go.
I live in Colorado, so
Denver has to have something big there. They have something
they
Mile
used
High
to
Comic Con or something
COVID.
like that. Oh well, I think that's everybody though.
Yeah.
I think FanX is actually because they're not until like October, so they announced that they're actually going to have their convention this year, which is kind of nice. But I've never been to that one either, and that would be quite the distance for me to travel. I mean, Salt Lake's only about 6 hours from here if you really put the pedal to the ground. But that would be a really fun one to go to. I know a lot of Boise people like to go to FanX because a lot of big celebrities tend to show up to that one.
Yep. All right, let's talk about your podcast listenership. As a listener, what defines a good podcast to you?
Defines a good podcast to me? I think again, we've just done it for fun. We've never really it's like, hey, here's what we are, here's what we do. If you want to listen to it, great. If not, then whatever. And we're not angry about it.
No,
so
this is you you listening to shows. What defines a good podcast to you as the person listening to it, not as the producer?
There's so many elements. It also depends on kind of the type of podcast you're listening to. Like if you're listening to something like say Kevin Smith, like if you listen to Hollywood Babylon, like the level of banter between those two guys is impeccable. Like the show never has a dull moment in it. Or like if you listen to like a radio play podcast, those ones like the ones that have like really good like musical elements and background elements as an interactive part of the show, those are the really good ones that tend to, like if you listen to the Wolverine podcast, that's really good. Like it's so good. What else? Or like even just small ones like you guys and Dodd and me and whatever, like, and side scrollers, like that's the reason I love side scrollers. Like it wasn't really like professionally done for the most part, but it felt like you were talking and listening to guys who you would have hung out with at high school and talked about video games after school. Like, oh, here's the latest release of this. Well, let's talk about that. Remember when we used to play Mario when we were like 6 years old? Yeah, that was amazing. So like those are just, that kind of thing is really positive. I think as long as the energy between the people who are talking is positive, consistent, and just I guess electric is kind of the word you really want to look for. Is it's natural. If it's natural, it's going to be good. If it's two people trying to and ah off each other for half an hour, you're going to lose interest real quick. So anyway,
that's what editing is for.
True. But so here's the thing. That's the thing I do with my podcast. I do little to no editing to any of my podcasts. I used to at the beginning, but then I was like, you know what? That's just part of the show. Like if it isn't natural when you're rolling with it, I don't want to hear it. So even if there's like a moment of like quietness, if it's only like a split second, I'm not worried about it. But the most editing I'll throw into my podcast is I'll throw the intro at the beginning of the show and the outro at the end of the show. And that's about the most editing I do. And I'll do like the noise reduction. But other than that, that's about it.
Mm-hmm. As a listener, what does a podcast have to draw you in? So this is more of like you listen to, say, the first episode of a podcast series or something. What does that one episode have to keep you coming back week after week?
I mean, a lot of the same. So if I get sparked in interest of a show, like if something catches my ear and I start to listen to it and I hear that first episode and I'll give it some leeway if it's rough, obviously, because it's the first show. You don't really know what to expect. And I might come back for maybe another 2 to 5 episodes just to kind of see what they've done with it since they've gotten feedback or whatever. Mm-hmm. But after that, it's like if they haven't done anything to really try and improve or do something different, that they haven't really addressed some of the issues that they have with the show, and I just tend to lose interest real quick. But I haven't really ever lost full interest of a show before. And to be fair, I do tend to listen to more produced podcasts. They probably have a studio and a production crew that put their podcast together. But other than that, yeah, if it's an independent podcast, I like those elements too. That's the thing. Like if it's just us bantering and having fun, that's the stuff I like too. So I don't know. It would have to be a real stink bomb to really not get my attention. I just like having something in my ear, as a background noise. And if it has my attention and is funny and I can giggle every once in a while or get really into a story or a plot line, depending on the type of podcast I'm listening to, I'll probably keep listening to it.
So none of this. Yeah,
I've had some, I listened to some educational and actually, you know what? I'll go back. The last podcast I listened to that for the life of me I could not get into was a podcast about programming, because I was starting to get into computer programming last year, and I said, let me see what podcasts are out there. And I listened to this one podcast, and it was the most droll and dry. I understand that programming is very number oriented, very sequential, very linear in some cases, but it's just, your show shouldn't be like that.
You don't want a show that's binary. You don't want a show that's ones and zeros.
Yeah, it can get real tired and real just heavy on the senses after a while. You're just I can't do this anymore. It's you can only talk about running loops and whatnot so many times before your brain wants to explode.
It's a good thing I don't drink, because I did just listen to a podcast where they literally mentioned their multiple Discord channels that they have 10 times within an hour and a half, or 10 times or more within an hour and a half. And I'm like, they said Discord, got to take a drink. I'd be in the hospital right now. I wouldn't be on this podcast.
Yeah.
Go ahead. What?
You shouldn't have 4 Ben Steins hosting the podcast. It just doesn't work.
No.
It's good to have one dry comedy guy on the show. That's fine, but all 4 of you shouldn't be like that.
No, you can have a Ben Stein, but you need a Morgan Freeman to, shake it up a little bit.
Indeed.
Jack Nicholson,
Yep.
I want to hear that podcast, just so you know. Just Jack Nicholson, Morgan Freeman, and Ben Stein just having a roundtable discussion about anything would be amazing.
No, I just have to, learn how to do the voices, and I'll be good.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about time length. As a listener, do you prefer short 30 minutes to an hour and 30-minute shows, or do you prefer longer podcast episodes, as in 2 hours or more?
Half hour to an hour seems to be really good as far as a structured show goes. If there's 3 to 4 people on a show like us, I would say anywhere around an hour is a good length. One of the shows that we wanted to do on Nerd Effect was actually called Brain Bites, and we did 1 or 2 episodes of that show, and the whole idea was taken from another podcast I had listened to where they actually set up a timer. You got 15 minutes to take the topic and then discuss it. And then each person kind of gets their own 2 to 3 minute go. And then the last 5 minutes is open discussion. And then we just kind of end the podcast there. So I thought that was kind of a nifty idea that we attempted once or twice and then never did it again. But that would, I think the problem with that was finding topics that you could discuss quickly. Yeah, I think it's a good idea, and I really want to do it again. I just don't think at the time we were really set up to do it. It was a test more than anything at the time, and I think if we really tried to put our heads down and do it, and maybe even just like create a list of topics and come prepared, that would be a little easier to do, I think, in the future.
You always have to be prepared.
Mm-hmm.
As a listener, do you start at the beginning of a podcast, the most recent episode, or do you jump around? Now, I know technically this matters if it's like a podcast covering, let's say, The Walking Dead for all, 11 seasons or 9? I don't know how many seasons that show had, but like, obviously a review podcast, you'd start at the beginning, but generally, when you first find something, do you listen to the most current episode, or do you go all the way back to the beginning?
I will, if I get in the middle of a podcast, if it's like 3 seasons in, I will start at the most like recent, I guess, iteration of that podcast, and just listen to that current season. And if it holds my interest, I'll go back and listen to the older stuff. If it's story based, like if it's a radio play or whatever, I'll start those from the beginning. But those really don't have like any sort of, timestamp on them in order to make them remain current. It's a story. It's like a book. You can start it at the beginning whenever you want. But yeah, I try to start at the beginning when possible. If it's like so deep into the show, like if they're a full season, 2 seasons, 3 seasons into it, I'll start with whatever's most recent and work my way back from there.
Very cool. Very cool.
Nice. So, as a listener, how many hosts are too many on one episode?
How many hosts? Anything really beyond like 4, you're going to have people talking over each other really bad. And that's, I would say, nixing the idea of having guests on the show. Like if you have a guest on the show, that's a different element, I think, in my opinion. But as far as the hosts who repeatedly show up, having more than 4 it's going to be chaos, and your show's going to run way too long. That's my opinion.
I kind of agree with that in some regards, unless you're getting unless it's like a top 100 countdown, for instance.
Well, see that's fine, because that's going to be more structured. You're going to go around the table and ask people their opinion as you go, and as long as you have one guy who's actually controlling the show, who's actually saying, okay, your turn, your turn, your turn, then I think that's just fine. That's not a big deal, I think. However, I will say your show's going to run really long. Mm-hmm. That's the only downfall you're going to have.
So when do you decide to stop listening to a podcast altogether?
So I haven't. Okay, here's some blunt truth. I haven't listened to an actual podcast in probably like 2 years. And that isn't necessarily because I don't want to listen to podcasts in general. It's because my life has just taken a different direction in the idea of what I'm doing with my professional life. Because I was in an office environment for 12 years and could just listen to it while I worked. Like I knew my job inside and out, so it was very robotic, and I could just do it without really thinking about it. So I had the time to just sit there and put headphones on for 8 hours a day and listen to whatever podcast I wanted to. What ended up happening was back in 2019, I decided to go into a programming boot camp. So I needed to maintain my focus there. And then I tried to move into a new career. That lasted for about 5 months before the pandemic hit. And I really needed to focus on that career. And when you're in programming, a lot of people will think, you're just a code monkey at that point, which isn't necessarily true. You're actually all over the friggin' place. You spend maybe 3 out of your 8 hours a day actually doing anything programming related. So you're actually running around doing ideas, putting things on paper, talking to bosses and customers and stuff like that all the time. You're more of a consultant than you are a programmer. And at least in the job I was in, there are jobs where you just sit there in the dark room and, monkey go click, click, and, pretties happen on the screen. But I'm not sure which monkeys you're talking about, and I'm not sure what screens you're watching, but oh wow. Well, hey, your computer doesn't work without somebody who's doing that, so it's there are people who just prefer that type of job. I don't prefer that type of job. I got into programming because I wanted to make really pretty things. Like I have a very artistic sense of mind, as I'm sure you guys do too. You're very creative as far as like doing podcasts and stuff like that. And I'm sure you guys have seen some of the drawings I do. I was like, well, what if I took both of those ideas? Like, I'm a big tech junkie, but I also like art. So I was like, what can I parlay that into? Oh, web design. So, and you see people just build, like, even something simple built out of WordPress has, like, on the back end, people who actually have to build those out to make them look the way they do. So that really caught my interest. And there's a lot, and what you learn is that there's a lot more to programming than obviously just some HTML and CSS to make things look pretty. There's a lot of JavaScript and forms and loops and stuff like that you really got to learn. Those are like that's the tough stuff. And then back end programming, which will absolutely tear your brain in half. But yeah, that's why I took the career change, because I was just kind of tired of doing what I was doing. And after the divorce, I was kind of going through this like journey of self-discovery type thing. I was like, you know what? I'm going to take this opportunity. I'm going to like learn something new, maybe even do a career change. What pays well that I could be interested in? Oh, programming. Well, I can't do a 4-year degree because I'm a 36, 37-year-old man with a daughter, and doing that without any sort of income would be an absolute drain on my existence as a human being. So there is a local boot camp in town that I attended. That's a 13-week boot camp that teaches you like basically enough to be dangerous and enough to get hired, and the rest you just kind of got to make sure you learn on your own as you go. So yeah, that's what I did. And then the pandemic hit, and I've been laid off since March of last year. So
that sucks.
And it does kind of suck, but at the same time, it's like I got that year to I don't know, like we're gonna go way off the rails here, but I got like super depressed all summer long and all the way through Christmas of last year. And I got really hard on myself because of how things had went. And in the last 3 to 4 months, that's kind of come back around. And now I've kind of gotten into this mode where I feel way more motivated than I used to be, and just kind of in this mood of wanting to finally kind of put some change on things. Like, I'm vaccinated, I'm ready to get out into the job market, I need to do some things to move my life forward. I'm almost 40 years old, and I really want to like push myself out of my own comfort zone enough to like not go completely insane, but enough to like challenge myself and push myself forward in a new career. And I'm actually currently waiting on a callback from a company that's supposed to call me this week. I'm feeling confident about it, and I really need this job. Keep your fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Will do. So, but it would be the job that in hand would be enough for me to learn, and it's enough to like because it starts as an apprenticeship program, a 90-day apprenticeship program with these guys, and it's a paid thing. And you start as a cohort. They bring you in like 4 or 5 people at a time. They train you hardcore for 90 days on Salesforce, and then send you off into the wilderness of their company. So, and there's a lot of growth and potential in the Salesforce program, and that would be really good if I could get that. So that's where I'm at.
Well, very cool. I'm actually going to interrupt Steve on this one, because question 15 is, what podcasts are you currently listening to? Well, you already said you aren't listening to anything. What would you recommend that you have listened to?
I was going to say, it's not that I don't listen to podcasts. It's just that I haven't really listened to anything currently. But if I had to like go back, and I would listen to, so the Wolverine podcast, if you want a really good storyline podcast, is amazing. Like it's all voice acted. The guy's name absolutely escapes my mind, but he was like he was the main dwarf in the Hobbit movies, the 3 Hobbit movies.
Frodo?
No, the dwarf.
Oh, the dwarf. Oh yeah, I know who you're talking about.
but he voices Wolverine in that.
Oh wow!
And it's absolutely perfect. Anything by Kevin Smith and Chris Hardwick is going to be good. Those are like the well-produced ones. Obviously, Geekcast Radio Network, you got to listen to that. Put in the plug. But you're already here, so man, there's just so much. Like I used to listen to I had like 10 different podcasts that I used to listen to regularly, and now some of their names are escaping me. There was a horror podcast that I listened to that was really good. Man, I wish I had names, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. I know Markiplier just started a podcast that I'm really interested in listening to. I just haven't listened to it yet. And man, yeah. So that's about the best I could probably really recommend to you. If you want good laughs and giggles, listen to Hollywood Babylon, Kevin Smith's like live show podcast. It's really good, always funny.
All right, let's talk about your podcast production. As a producer, now obviously this is when you were doing the podcast, not in this very moment. Did you find yourself listening to podcasts less and less as you were producing your own show?
You make it sound like I'm just dead at this point.
No, that's me. Hello, as a producer, I'm lucky if I listen to 5 podcasts a week, whereas before I started doing this stuff, I was listening to like 20 a week. Now I'm producing 20 a week half the time.
That's true, but you're able to do this full time, whereas I didn't have that ability. I had at least I'm assuming that's kind of like semi full time thing for you, right? Am I wrong in that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do it because I love it. Yeah.
So when I had my job, I was able to listen to a lot of podcasts and not really worry about editing and stuff like that. And we only edited 1 or 2 shows a week, so it wasn't a big burden on me to like do that, even though I told you I was 7 or 8 deep that haven't been posted, but we won't think about that. Recording a podcast is definitely the easy part. It's the editing and posting that's the pain in the ass. Yeah, I listened to just about as many podcasts, I think, as I did before and after I started the podcast, because I did the majority of my listening at my day job. So that's my answer. My short answer.
As a producer, are you a podcast planner, or are you just throwing stuff at the microphone to see what sticks?
So the extent of our planning is sometimes we'll do the list podcast, which you do have to do a little bit of planning for because you want to make your list and come ahead of time with it. Things that revolved around events, say like E3 or Comic-Con, we would try and plan and listen to the actual like event as it happened so we could come to the show with something. Other things we would just say like, here's our topic for the week. Let's just freehand it and see where we go from there. We can just kind of bounce off each other and banter about it. So it just kind of depended on the subject at hand. We also did a D&D style podcast called The Initiative as part of Nerd Effect. And that was just us running a campaign. And usually it was either run by Mason or Mike, because I have like next to no D&D experience and I have no desire to ever be a DM. So that came with some planning on their part because they had to be able to plan out the actual game as we went. But yeah, so there was some planning, but a lot of it was really some banter just between the biggest part of the planning was just coming up with topics and having a general idea of what to come to the show with. After that, it was just kind of an hour out, sometimes even an hour and a half. I will admit, even though I said an hour is the ideal size of a podcast, our show would run an hour and a half, sometimes easy. So, yeah, kind of very free formatted for the most part with some planning.
Cool.
I kind of do a little bit of both.
Well, I mean, between Steve and I, we kind of rely on each other sometimes to the point of if he's like, what do you want to do for Altered Geek this week? I'm like, I don't know. It's your show. What do you want to do? Basically, we are two of the vultures from the Jungle Book sometimes. And I'm like, oh, well, let's do this and let's just make it a short show and, whatever. Like, we did a thing called, was it 10 or 20? Yeah, it was like 10-minute blitz or 20-minute blitz where, like you were saying earlier, about taking one or two topics and just fitting it into one show, but you only have 10 minutes to talk about it kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, and I think those types of shows are great. I just wish I had more time to do them is all.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same boat. I used to produce 5 or 6 episodes of shows during the week and have time to edit them and record them, and now I don't.
Hey, if you can get them recorded, I can get them edited. Hello, team effort.
True. So, as a producer, are you a one-man show kind of host, or do you prefer working with co-hosts?
I prefer working with co-hosts because I'm as much of an introvert as I am. I do like socializing with my friends. I like being in the same room with them and hanging out. It's like even when they came over to do the show, that wasn't the only thing we did. Sometimes we'd hang out and watch a couple of shows and just mess around for a couple hours. But yes. But as far as like editing and stuff, I was pretty much a one-man show. Like I did all the editing and uploading and website maintenance and stuff like that. That was all put on me, which is why I sort of blame those other episodes for not getting uploaded. In fact, I'm looking at my website right now that hasn't been touched in a year, and I'm not sure why, but there's like cover photos that aren't even loading, and the slider doesn't work.
It happens to all of us.
Like what happened there? So now to figure that out.
Oh crap, you ran out of storage space, so we're going to delete all these photos that you spent hours re-adding to it.
It's a shared server with infinite space, so like so maybe
there is no such thing.
Well, if you read the fine print, they say unlimited space, unlimited storage. However, they give you a file count.
I haven't run into that yet, and we've been doing this since 2013. So then again, you guys put out way more shows than we do. But I'm not sure who your host is. I use DreamHost with a WordPress install.
Yeah, I tried using them and our site tanked.
All right, well, I can't argue with that. So
12 years of content, thousands of hours of audio, nobody can handle us.
That's where you gotta start paying for that private server, and it gets really expensive.
Yeah. We're almost to that VPS stage. I'm dreading it. How do you go about finding your co-hosts?
They're all my friends.
It makes that super easy then.
Yeah, it does make it super easy. Yeah, it was all, like I said, it was just a reason for us to hang out. So I was like, hey guys, you want to do this thing? And they were like, sure, let's do it. And then that was our whole thing.
So as a producer of podcasts, do you feel you need all of the fancy gear like mixing boards and things you would typically need at maybe a radio station, just good stuff or just stuff that you prefer?
Need is a real strong word. And I think if you want a really good production value, yes, you do. But as far as even I keep bringing him up, but that's just because he's a guy I listen to a lot of. And so Kevin Smith would always preach towards the end of some of his shows where podcasting was a huge creative outlet from him when he was not doing movies. So he would always say, he's like, podcasting is like one of the easiest things you could possibly ever do. All you have to do is the simplest form of it is you already have a microphone built into your phone, pull up your voice recorder and record for a few hours, and you can edit and post it right from your phone if you really wanted to. You can just, even you don't even have to have a website. Like you can just upload it to something like SoundCloud or Mixcloud and just call it a day. But even those cost money. But nonetheless, even Mixcloud is free. And yeah, upload them there. And that was like the easiest form of doing a podcast you could ever do. You don't have to have editing equipment. You don't have to put an intro or an outro on it. You can just talk into a microphone for an hour and upload it. And that can be your podcast. Whether or not people's going to listen to it, that's up to them. But as far as a creative outlet to do, it takes almost nothing to actually do a podcast as far as that goes. Now, if you want good production and editing and stuff like that, then yeah, using audio editing and having nice equipment that actually makes you sound like you're decent, that's going to cost you money. I don't even want to know how much money I've spent on sound equipment at this point.
For the most part, it's just buying the same stuff over and over again. I don't have a mixer. The fact that we're recording this over Skype in a CAD U37 condenser mic and JVC headphones that are, a few years old now, and yeah, I do all the editing, and I now make sure they are leveled now that I have a program that can actually level the stuff for me. But it's again, for me personally, it's that concentration level. If I have to have a whole thing to the left of me where I have to make sure every, it's don't touch my levels. It's oh God, just no. Anyway.
All of our stuff is just recorded right into Audacity. It's just it's one USB input into the computer and hit record, and Audacity goes, and you can edit it right from there.
Yeah, that's true. Audacity is good for that. They're also good for recording, as long as you have the stereo mix plugin. They're also good for recording audio off of wherever. All right. As a producer, you kind of already talked about this. How much time do you put into editing the show? You apparently don't put any time into editing your shows.
editing the show, I think there's a lot of wait time in editing as far as the compiling goes. Once you go from the raw file into an MP3, there can be some waiting that happens there that you got to wait for it to do all that before you can actually have a file that's available to upload.
Right.
I think where it comes to editing, you aren't thinking about just editing the audio file either. I also create the cover art and the Mixcloud art and all that stuff that goes into the podcast as well. And then I do all the social media posting and stuff like that after it's posted, and it just make sure it all goes up and make sure it's available for people to be like, oh, hey, look, this is up, and make it look halfway decent. And you're also
go ahead. Sorry.
I was saying you're making the blog post for it and everything, and making sure that your plugin is pointed to that particular podcast, and make sure that iTunes and all those guys recognize that it's there, Stitcher and whatnot. And there's a lot more that goes into it than just editing your audio file and calling it a day.
True. And I think for the most part, as long as he doesn't mind, and he's gotten used to over the last 12, 13 years, my editing style, I'm pretty sure Steve doesn't mind sending me a thing saying, hey, can you edit this? Because, again, I have the most time out of the two of us where I'm like, hey, I need images for the next 8 months in this one email. Do them when you can. Because Steve is the art guy and I'm the audio guy.
Right.
I cannot do art to save my life. I just can't.
I'm honestly surprised nobody's attacked us yet, because all the art that I pull from for our shows is usually pulled from a source that I just Google.
I mean, that's the same thing with us. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, especially with our initiative podcast, when it comes to the D&D style stuff, you're just looking for art that's relevant to your show to use as cover art, and a lot of that I'm sure is probably licensed to somebody, or somebody created that and I have no idea how to give them credit, so I'm just kind of using it on a whim. But we're so small, nobody really cares, and we're not profiting off anything. If I could give them credit, I totally would. I just don't know where I pulled it from.
Here's the way you give them credit, is if you just mention them. So for a specific, coming up, Steve and I are going to be talking about Transformers Beast Wars numbers 4 and 5. Mm-hmm. Well, Josh Burcham, the artist, Josh Burcham did the cover for issue 4. So Steve has Dinobot from the Beast Wars comic in the featured banner for the Pullbag episode 417. We'll just say in the show, hey, the comic cover art that you see in the featured banner is from the main cover of Beast Wars number 4 done by Josh Burcham. As long as you mention them in the show, that's the easiest way to give the credit. All right, you kind of already mentioned this as well, since your show is an in-person show, but as a producer, do you prefer in-person recordings or over-the-internet recordings?
Potato. I like the in-person recordings because it's done with my friends. I think if it was with a complete stranger, it'd be a little more awkward. But that's when, you have a guest on the show and they come on and they usually like there's 2 or 3 of us there that are interviewing them as a whole. Mm-hmm. So everybody's comfortable and stuff like that. I've never had the opportunity to actually host a show over the internet. Like I'm doing this with you guys, but you guys are hosting it, so I'm just kind of rolling with your guys' punches. Whereas me hosting it, I have not had the ability or really the want actually to do that. I think if I had, I need to do more research into that myself, and maybe I can even reach out to you guys as far as how you guys do it. But yeah, I just have never done that. In fact, we may have even done some pandemic shows if I knew how to do that, because then I could have just gotten Mason and Mike to just record from home. But,
yeah, see, the perfect thing now that Skype has a built-in recorder, if you want to use Skype, I know Steve will recommend Discord and other things to do other things, because Discord and both Discord and Zencaster record on individual tracks. But Skype for me is the easiest thing because it records the whole thing. I don't have to worry about losing anything unless the internet connection dies. I don't have to worry about any of that stuff kind of thing. So yeah, anyway. All right. As both a listener and a producer, do you prefer... Oh, okay. Well, this question doesn't technically pertain to you because you have one show, but you, like you said, you have a D&D type episode on your show. But basically, the question is, do you, specifically as a listener, do you prefer one feed have everything, or should each type of show have its own feed? So, for example, we have All Things Transformers, which is our news and main discussion show. And then I have TFG1. We have Beast Unleashed, which is the Beast Wars show. And then we have Transformers Animated, which is the animated cartoon show. Do you want those all on one? Or do you think of This Week in Geek when they had, Nerd News was its own thing. And what else did they have? Oh, God. Like the commentaries that they did was its own thing. Which do you prefer, all at one or separated?
I think it depends on your goal. I think you guys, like you guys specifically called yourself the News Nerd Network. If you're trying to create a network of different shows, if that's your goal, I think having a separate feed for all of that, as long as you're consistent, is good. So whereas us, we only recorded 1 or 2 shows a week, so we kept it all in one feed, but each show kind of had its own title as far as like, so if you knew it was the Initiative, it was the Initiative, and you could see that it would say like, the Initiative episode 28, or Nerd Effect News episode 3 or whatever, and you could trail it back that way. I've wanted to do things like you guys do, actually creating a network of shows. I think it'd be fun to like reach out to other people, kind of with that whole pod garage thing. Like I was telling you, like it'd be fun, like if everybody in that garage scenario, if we could offer up hosting space for each person to host their own show, but have like one centralized location to go get that. You know what I mean? So if that was several different networks, or like even Smodcast, like Smodcast has all of its shows separate, but it's all on one site. You can go right to smodcast.com and you can see all of their shows. Right. Same with you guys, all that stuff. Whereas, and same with us technically, but we only have the one feed. So that's all. We're small. So I think if we decided to expand out and do more, I would probably, start separating some of that stuff out.
All right. That's awesome. You could always join us. But anyway, how do you... How do you use social media to promote the podcast? What's the best part of social media for you in promoting the show?
Promoting the show, I think social media just is kind of its own. It's kind of its own self-serving beast. Like you just post the show up on your social media platforms, and then that just like is a signal to people to go listen. I think where social media comes in handy is with interacting with your audience. I think we had a goal in our website in the early stages where we were going to create a board where people could go in and just talk about the different shows or different categories and stuff like that, and kind of create like a faux social media using message board and stuff like that. But that did not pan out. In fact, it got hacked at one point and got really bad. A bunch of bots and stuff like that, posting porn sites and stuff like that, was happening in our board. And I was like, well, that's done. So we just deleted that altogether. So where social media comes in handy is like through Facebook, and we use Facebook primarily. I'm not a huge Twitter guy, like at all. I like using Instagram to post a lot of our convention stuff. Like if we go to conventions and start taking pictures of like cosplayers and events and stuff like that, we'll post all that stuff to our Instagram page. I have one of my favorite pictures I ever took at a convention was we're friends with the local Rebel Alliance and I forgot the dark side people, 501st. So they're Star Wars cosplayers, and they do charity events and stuff like that. And there's like different areas of the country where these guys go and they do charity events and stuff like that. So they promote themselves at these conventions. So one of these guys comes up to our thing dressed as a Mandalorian and starts playing super. So one of our things. So since we're a podcast, not a lot of people come up to us. So we have to give them a reason. So we tend to give away a lot of free stuff. Like I'll buy a bunch of like party stuff and stuff like that and put it out on our tables to have people come up and actually talk to us. I have like a little, like a 15-inch picture frame, like a digital picture frame. Mm-hmm. But I bought that. It's cheap. It was only like $80, but it has a video function too. So I just loaded up a bunch of our interviews onto it and on an SD card and just uploaded it. So now those videos just play on loop. So you can kind of see what we're doing there. But I also invested in a RetroPie and uploaded a bunch of NES and SNES and Genesis games and stuff onto it. And I bought a rolling cart that we have like a 40-inch TV that mounts to it. And we set that up right outside our booth so people can come up and just play it for free and just hang out.
Reminds me of the old days at the mall with the Nintendo Center.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, so they could just come up to it. But somebody was at our booth playing the SNES Super Star Wars game, and the Mando who came up to us behind him picked up the controller and started playing it. So we had this picture of a Mandalorian playing Super Star Wars on SNES, and it's like the coolest picture I think I've ever taken. Like, and I've taken a lot of cool pictures at conventions, but I thought that was just awesome. Kind of a cool visual for our booth.
Very cool, very cool.
But yeah, it's basically fan interaction and human interaction through our social media, I think, is where that comes in handy. Or like I'll share on Facebook to our Nerd Effect page semi-regularly. Like if there's something coming up. Like I think the most recent thing I posted was they had shown the most recent Shazam stage set photo of all the new different costumes for the Shazam characters. And I think I shared that to our social media page, and people like and comment on that and say, "Oh yeah, costumes are cool" and stuff like that, and we'll interact with them. But other than that, like I don't really. It's kind of as far as the podcast itself goes, it's just more of a warning system for the show, and then we just use it for fan interaction instead of the board. So that's kind of where social media went for us.
Very cool.
What is your favorite topic to discuss on a podcast?
It's funny, we don't do the show anymore. It was my favorite show, but I guess the rest of the crew kind of got tired of it. But we used to do a news show ourselves, and I was actually inspired by you guys and Dodd, where we had like the nerd news, and we each just picked a story to do, and we would talk about it. We'd go over the story and then free banter it for about 5 minutes, and then go on to the next story and banter about that for 5 minutes. And I always thought that was fun because it was kind of easy. The stories just kind of serve themselves to you as they come up, and you have kind of a week to prepare for it. And it was really not that hard to like talk about, and you can come up with some funny stuff. I think we were trying to do like an idiot of the week type thing where you'd read about something in the news where somebody did something dumb. And I think we stopped that pretty quick though, unfortunately. And then we did but generally we just pick a topic every week. We try to find something that's like a current event in the realm of nerddom. So whether or not that's like movies or we'd find something in science that had happened recently that we could talk about. And we just kind of pick a subject. Like, let's see here. And we do a holiday gift guide every year, but that one's kind of, don't tell anybody this secret, but that's kind of a way we could earn a little bit of scratch on the side. But we do a holiday gift guide every year where we pick some stuff off Amazon and stuff like that, because we have an associate account So all the links that we post to our site for the Christmas lists that we make will garner us like 20 cents or whatever.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to buy something for Christmas through those links, it would help us out. And I think we make fun of that at the beginning of every show too. It's like, if you want to help us out, you can check out this gift guide, that kind of thing. And we've made maybe a total of $2 in the last 7 years, so it's not like we're making anything.
Yeah. You don't get into podcasting to make money. I mean, unless you're Kevin Smith or somebody like that, but still.
Yeah, unless you're popular enough to get sponsors, like hardcore sponsors, like that's one thing. Like you hear them, like the big YouTube and podcast companies that get like Casper Mattress and Manscaped and stuff like that. They'll get those guys as sponsors, but it's not in the cards for a podcast our side. I think the most we really get quote unquote paid for is free access to all these conventions where we get to act as media and interview people, but it promotes them too. It's kind of like we'll shake your hand if you shake ours, or that kind of thing.
Exactly. It's always a two-way street when it comes to promotion. Like, hey, you have a podcast? Send me an ad. I'll throw it on my shows, and I'll send you an ad that I've done for whatever that I do, kind of thing. It's quid pro quo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just looking at some of our prior shows. We did this was a fun show. We did a show called Late to the Party, which I thought was kind of fun as a topic, because we were talking about all the shows that we just kind of like, shows that had been out for quite a while, like a decent handful of years, that we just never got into, and then all of a sudden started watching it, and we were like, holy crap, this is the best thing ever. Mm-hmm. And I think mine was, of course, Doctor Who, but because I was very late to that party. I didn't start watching it until 2011. And the only reason I got into it was because Evie was born. And I was at home for a week, and I binged the hell out of it because it was on Netflix at the time. And I made it through all of like David Tennant and Matt Smith's shows at the time in like the course of a week. So, and then immediately became a Doctor Who fan after that. In fact, I live, breathe, eat, and die Doctor Who now at this point. So, anyway.
There you go. That's awesome.
So was there ever a moment when you were kind of like, all right, podcasting, I'm done. Peace out.
Only because it was forced on me at this point. I think, if I'm dead honest with you, it wasn't that I wanted to ever give up podcasting. It's just that podcasting at a certain point started to become a burden rather than a benefit. You know what I mean? So where immediately post divorce, I started having a lot more time on my hands, and I was able to have more free time during the weeks where I didn't have the kiddo, and I could edit and post and stuff like that. But it became, as life began to get more complicated, carving time out to actually like edit the shows was painful. Like, because I knew what it was going to take to edit and post that show. It would be like 2 to 3 hours to get really, from point A to point B and get everything uploaded. So, that's when it started becoming a burden. And it's not that I didn't want to do the show. It's just that it just became more difficult. So, yeah. And so as things start to pan out in the near future, I'm probably going to look at different avenues for editing and posting and stuff like that, and try and see if there's a better and quicker way to do this. I know at one point I was looking at SoundCloud as a point of hosting. No.
They're horrible.
Because don't they have like a built-in RSS feed that you can just feed right into a podcast and just call it a day?
Yeah, everybody does.
Oh.
Yeah, they're so like not keeping up with the times with what podcasting is turning into, that they're just, and they're constantly on the state of going bankrupt. So I would never recommend them.
Well, to be fair, SoundCloud was never really, I don't think it was ever really intended to be a podcast hosting situation. Like, it was intended for independent music producers, I think, at one point.
Yeah.
Like, that was 99% of its source, and then they probably just added, podcasting as like okay, we'll do it. And then, like I do. So I do all my hosting through, like I said, DreamHost and a WordPress install. And then I think I paid theme forest for a theme for our podcast that I then installed as part of my WordPress. And then, like, I think it's like the Blueberry podcast plugin.
Oh,
so
PowerPress, that's free.
It's not specifically called PowerPress, but it's it's just a plugin for WordPress called Burberry. And Burberry, I think, is specifically, I think it's just a way for them to like promote themselves, because Burberry is a podcast hosting company of sorts. But they also have like a plugin that you can just plug in the link to the link to the MP3, a title description, say whether or not it's adult oriented, and actual podcast description, and then it just picks all that up off the RSS feed.
Well, and it can also generate its own RSS feed from your website. We use the same plugin.
I think
you can generate your own.
I've never done that. I haven't done that. I think what I'm doing right now is going through FeedBurner on Google.
Yeah. If your FeedBurner feed gets too big from too many years of content, it maxes out at a certain memory limit and it stops posting new episodes. So just be aware of that too.
Good thing you're not as big as we are. Big in quotation marks.
Blueberry also came out with their own alternative to FeedBurner called Podcast Mirror, which is basically an up-to-date version of what Google has neglected. So.
Oh, well, good times. Nice to know I have to now figure out all this when I decide to get back into podcasting again.
Hey, you know what? We live to teach people around here, so, you know.
We learn by mistake.
Absolutely.
Well, see, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about when it comes to the Pod Garage thing. Like, that was my whole idea. Like, if I wanted it to be a nonprofit kind of learning situation where we could take like a handful of people and show them the basics, and then they could start up their own podcast. And if they need like hosting space or whatever, they could pay us for that. But it was kind of just an idea to like give people a creative outlet and not have to like financially burden certain people. They can just come in and use the equipment to make their own show, and then, you know, copy it to a flash drive or whatever they need to do, and they can take it home and edit it. Or if they want to host it with us, we could do that. But they could just do all that right there and then upload the show, and they don't have to worry about, you know, maintaining any of the equipment themselves. But that was kind of the idea I had. I don't know if that's good or not. I don't know what, you know, risks are involved in that, especially when it comes to handling that much audio equipment. But yeah, just stuff to figure out.
So what do you see as the differences in podcasting versus being on the radio?
Oh man. Well, the big thing immediately is that when you're on the radio, you're live. Like, if your mic is hot, it's hot, and people are going to hear whatever you have to say in that moment. So, I think that's like the big difference. You can kind of say the same for like live shows, like Kevin Smith's Hollywood Babylon, where he's at a comedy club and performing live in front of an audience. But even in the post, you could still edit some of that out for the actual podcast. So I don't know. I think that's the big difference as far as radio versus podcasting, is that you're gonna hear everything that's about to be said live and in the raw. I would say with a few exceptions, like maybe you have like a pre-recorded interview that you're going to use as part of your show or something like that. But that seems to be the big difference to me, is that you're very much live at any given point.
Awesome. Yeah, I've had experience with that, hosting a podcast live at a convention a few years back, and that was probably the most awkward thing for an introvert to do, especially when they contacted you to host their event, and I was like, well, I can do a podcast while I'm live and just record the whole thing, and, you know, easy content. And then they were like, we'll provide a co-host for you. And then 5 minutes before the event starts, they're like, oh yeah, the co-host that we had scheduled for you is not going to be available. You're flying solo. Have fun.
I did see one there was one other. So when we were at Cherry City Comic Con, there was a local podcast there. It's Cherry City was like the one podcast that we did that wasn't local, and it was out in Salem, Oregon. And there was another podcast there that looked like they had way more of their poop in a group than us. But there was like 3 or 4 of them at a table, and they were set up right next to the celebrity booths at the time. So they were able to just kind of like pull in celebrities as they felt like they wanted to, and they would do like a quick like 10, 15-minute interview for the podcast, and they were streaming it at the same time. So they were streaming, recording, uploading. They were doing all of that right from their table. And so they were doing a chunk of that live, which I thought that was a really cool idea, and I would personally like to do that at some point. The only problem with that is that my hosts are not like that. They have no desire to be on camera at all. So
I refuse. I break cameras. No one wants to look at this. This is why I do audio. Hello, this is
what's the old saying? You got a face made for radio.
Yep, got a face made for podcasting.
But I have no problem with that. Like, I know I'm a big guy, and I have plenty of body image issues. But that was part of the challenge, though. Too, you got to get around that and get to the point. I remember one of my first interviews over video was with a cosplayer, Joni Brosis, who's super cool, and she's amazing. But she's like 4'11", and weighs like maybe 110 pounds, and I'm like this 6'1", 300-pound giant standing next to her. Like, that was kind of awkward because you got to fit all that into the frame. And my first editing experience, I fucking trolls. I put that up on YouTube, and like, I remember I was really just starting to learn how to use video editing equipment at the time. I think at the time I was using Sony Vegas, and not very user friendly at all if you ever decide to use it. But I had created like a little like semi-transparent banner that went across the bottom of the screen. Well, that banner just happened to cover up, because she was so short and we were both trying to fit into the frame, would cover most of her torso. So a lot of, because she's a pretty, she's beautiful. And so when I had this like little banner going across her torso, I got like 3 or 4 comments that were like, "You really need to remove that banner next time." It's like, I know, I'm sorry. And of course, I don't even know where the source file is anymore at this point. So I just, it's kind of there forever. I can't really change it at this point. But yeah, because she was so short, she only takes up like the bottom half of the frame. And so now, half of her torso is completely blocked out by this semi-transparent banner with her name on it that I've since later learned that I only keep up for about 10 seconds, and now I've got the gist of like creating animations within the editor that roll it forward and backward and stuff like that. Yeah. So I that's not a problem anymore. But that was like my first real edit, and I got a lot of crap for it. So anyway.
See, again, as I mentioned earlier, that's the magic of having Steve or my buddy Neil. We all know TV's Mr. Neil around, where I can just say, okay, here's this slate, fit this into this and make it look cool. Or if I have an idea for something, it's like, whatever you need to do to make it look cool, as long as these are in here, go for it. Go crazy and then show me afterwards. Well, you already talked about the interviews you've done, but were there any others besides Jake the Snake that you've done?
So Joni was a fun one. Jeffrey Weissman was a fun interview. He is kind of crazy. He's very, very energetic, but if the name doesn't ring a bell, he played oh my god, not Marty McFly, obviously, because that's Michael J. Fox, but his dad. Oh,
he was the George in
George. He played George McFly in 2 and 3.
Oh, very cool.
After the fallout with what's his face.
Yeah. Crispin Glover, the psycho.
Crispin Glover, yeah. And he looked identical to him. Like, I had no idea there was even a character change until he told me during that interview. He's like, oh, yeah, I was this guy. But, yeah, he was George McFly in the second and third movies. And we had a really good conversation with him, and he was really energetic and really into it and was promoting, I guess, him and a couple of the characters from the Back to the Future movie, or actors from the Back to the Future movies, were trying to form like a band and all sorts of fun stuff. He was a hoot for an interview. I wouldn't say it was my worst interview of the bunch, but it was definitely not like as energetic and hopeful as I thought it was. But the two guys from Stranger Things didn't seem like they really wanted to be there.
Oh no,
So,
that sucks.
But the kid was fine. He was like, why am I forgetting their names? But he was the bully from the first season, the kid. And then the teacher, the guy who played the kind of like the audio video teacher to the kids. I interviewed those two guys, and they were cool. Like, they weren't rude or anything, but they just didn't have like the same, like, yay, I'm happy to be here energy, you know? So
We've had a couple actors like that.
Yep. Of course, then again, the only interview that's the worst interview is the one that never records, and you can't get the time back that you spent.
Mm-hmm. I will say one of my favorite moments was during that interview. So with the guys from Stranger Things, names are hard for some reason, and I don't know why, but Lois Lane from the original Superman movies, help me out here.
Margot Kidder
was at that same convention. We didn't get a chance to interview her, but we did get a chance to talk to her, and she was amazing. She like passed away a year later. Mm-hmm. But in that interview, she rolls behind us. The way they had the interview structured on this is it was at the Nampa Civic Center, and if the Civic Center it's like a theater. They have a theater area in the Civic Center that's set up for like stage plays and stuff like that. So there's a lot of chairs. So they use the stage with like 5 or 6 cocktail tables that stood about 5 feet tall, you know? And we would stand around those and do interviews, and there was different news outlets there and us. Like, I felt so out of place. Like, we were the only like non-professional place there. There was like Channel 7 News and radio stations and stuff at the tables around us, and here we are with this little rink-a-dink podcast with a camera that looked like we bought it off the Walmart special, and it was fun. By comparison, anyway. I mean, it was a good camera. It's a Canon like G20 or something like that. It was like a $700 camera, but compared to like the other equipment that was around, you felt kind of meek and not really belonging. But it was fun. But anyway, Margot Kidder comes up behind us, and she I didn't even see it until after I edited the video, but she totally video bombed our interview. Like, she like walked behind us and she looked at the camera and just like stuck her tongue out with her eyes wide open, and then just kept walking, and her handler's right behind her and everything. And I created this like slow-mo cut that I put up on the website, on our Facebook page. That's just, it's golden. Like, she made that interview everything. Like, that split second she was there made up for the entire like droll that interview actually was. So yeah, that was fun, having Margot Kidder up there just being her last name, Kidder.
That's awesome.
And she showed up, like, she was, God, that woman was awesome. Like, I can't tell you enough how awesome Margot Kidder was. She sat there in the front row of the seats when she was done with her interviews. She sat there in the front row of the seats of the theater and just told stories for like an hour straight. And just everybody was standing around her like they were listening to the greatest human being in history tell the most amazing things. And it was fun. It was really fun. It was like listening to grandma talk about, you know, growing up in the 70s. Like, yep. It was really cool. And she wore these like slip-ons that were like like bedazzled. Like, they were really sparkly. And I remember looking at her going, I really love your shoes. And she just kind of looks at me and smiles and goes, thanks. You know, super sweet lady. And she, one of the, so we have a lady here in town who runs a store called Repop Gifts, and it's a huge like pop culture store. Like, you go in there and you can find Doctor Who mugs and T-shirts and Harry Potter stuff and Star Trek stuff, and she decks it out. Like, her husband is a hobbyist, so he has a 2 model original Star Trek captain's chair that he built himself. All the LED lights in it and everything that make it blink and whatnot. Has the soundboard in it, so you hit a button that it'll make the appropriate soundboard sound to the buttons on the captain chair. Like, that's the type of store these guys run, and it's amazing. They have built their own hobbit hole, like, to scale, like all sorts of cool stuff in the store. Anyway, she's there. She runs a booth every year out of every one of these conventions. And Margot Kidder, and our booth was right across from there. I wish I would have taken a picture for her, but I didn't. But Margot Kidder went up to her booth, and she has a bunch of handmade stuff. A lot of her stuff is handmade too. So all these like skirts and pants and stuff like that she made with like Superman themed apparel that she made herself. Margot Kidder went up to that booth and bought anything that was Superman related from her. And
that's awesome.
She's like, Margot Kidder just dropped $300 worth of stuff at my booth like just now. And I was like, I know, I watched it. But Margot Kidder was so unassuming. Like, people didn't really recognize who she was unless you knew that was Margot Kidder. Like, she could walk around the convention, like probably 80% of the people would have no idea who she was. But I saw, and I knew exactly who it was because I had just interviewed in the same room as her and everything. And I was like, holy shit, that Margot Kidder is over at Millie's booth, like, buying everything that's remotely Superman related. She bought like 2 pairs of pants and like 3 skirts and all sorts of stuff. Like, walked away with like $300 worth of stuff from her booth, and she's like, that was amazing.
That is so cool. Yeah, I think if people saw her and if they heard her, you would know immediately, even if you didn't know. If anyone saw the Superman movies, as soon as she spoke, you would know that that's Lois Lane.
Yeah, I just think because it was a more localized convention, like,
right.
A lot of the people there are going to be children who probably don't really recognize some of the older celebrities. Like, they probably recognize the guys from Stranger Things and Walking Dead, but Margot Kidder is one of those people you bring in the older crowd. Mm-hmm. Like, she's a draw for those people, you know?
Yep, absolutely. Mm. It's so funny. I just spent the last few minutes as you're telling that story looking her up. Did not know at one point she was married to Kevin McAllister's father, Peter, John Hurd, from 79 to 80. He died in 2017. She died in 2018.
Yep.
That's just crazy.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I know she had some mental health issues, and she talked about that too. Like, she didn't just talk about her experiences as a savage, but she talked about mental health and stuff like that too, and how important it was to, like, you know, relieve yourself of your addictions and stuff like that the best you can. Like, she was one of the most empathetic human beings I've probably ever talked to that is, like, in the upper echelon of, you know, celebrity. So it was really nice talking to her. Like, she was just a super cool human being.
That is so very awesome. All right, only 2 more questions to go. What advice do you have for new and also veteran podcasters in the art of podcasting?
Don't be afraid to start. Just do it. Like, if it's something that, like, if it's just something you're interested in and you just want to talk to your friends and get it out there, just do it. Find a way to do it. Research your stuff. Just hop on Google. It's free. And figure out how the best and cheapest way to create a podcast is, and just do it. Don't be afraid to put your feet in the water. Even if it's like the most obscure topic in the world. Like, I created the name Nerd Effect specifically because I didn't want to pigeonhole myself into one particular topic. Like, I didn't want to call it, you know, Star Trek Effect and then not be able to do anything else. Mm-hmm. So I knew that we were going to be talking 90% about the realm of nerdity. The thing about that was that when you say nerd, anybody can be nerdy about anything, right down to sports. Like, I couldn't tell you a damn thing about, you know, like, I know how to play baseball. I know the rules of baseball, but I have a cousin named Cody who could give you the statistics for the Seattle Mariners for the last 5 years. So, like, you know, it just depends on who you are, and you can be a nerd about anything. So that's why I like the idea of the name Nerd Effect, is that it kind of opened that door to anything, the probability of anything, you know? So,
absolutely.
Don't be afraid to start. Figure out a way to do it easy. Come up with something that's, you know, a catch. Tell your friends, you know, get it out there. Don't be afraid to promote yourself. Facebook page is free, a Twitter is free, Instagram is free. Get out there, promote yourself, get your friends in on it. It's a blast. Some of my favorite moments have been just from podcasting, and look where it got me. I didn't think that I was going to be interviewing friggin' guys from Stranger Things and having Margot Kidder be the most awesome human being in front of me for an hour. No.
Very, very cool.
So, it just gets you to a point where, opportunities open up once they figure out who you are and what you do. And then you can work on growing from there. Like if you want to make it more production worthy, you can work on getting microphones and figure out how to do it over the internet like we're doing. Like there's just a lot of options, especially if you're, I don't know. I think a lot of guys like us who are kind of in that realm of nerd tend to have the equipment handy, like this Yeti mic. Like I already have it here, and you can start a podcast with that. You want to fly solo? Just do a solo podcast. You can do that too. You want to spit into a microphone?
Audacity. Yep.
Yeah, you just want to spit into a microphone for half an hour about a topic? Do that. Why not?
Yeah, I always have to have people to bounce off of. I can't. I tried in the beginning and it failed miserably.
Yeah, you're your own worst enemy, I think, when it comes to podcasting. Like, you can't. I would say at the bare minimum, I would have to have at least Mason present in order to really put a podcast together. And we've done duo shows before because the other two weren't able to show up or whatever. I think I've done shows without him and with Mike and Tara. So like it just kind of depends on who's willing to show up and make sure that they're people that you can have a conversation with. The more natural the energy, the better.
Oh, absolutely, most definitely, yeah. And it's so funny. I did. For those that don't know, because Studio 2009 is technically a new podcast that we started over on the Pullback, which is our comic podcast going on for almost 9 years now. Never thought I would get to over 400 episodes on that feed, but I have. And I knew immediately, as soon as I hit like 395, I'm like, okay, episode 404, comics not found. We start by talking about comics, and then we talk about anything else for the rest of the show, and then somehow tie it back into comics. So we did that, and I thought that was really, really awesome. So it's just, it all depends on who you're hosting with and what the topic is, and as long as everyone's engaged in wanting to discuss the topic, that works the best.
Yeah, don't be the person who's like sitting behind just asking what if. That's the worst part. That's the worst thing you can do. Is just don't be afraid to start. Just do it. If it's with Steve's Plantronics headset and a hope and a dream, do it. Hey, I started out on something worse than that. It was I don't even know what brand it was. There's a picture of me floating around from 2008, 2009. It's this weird over-the-ear headset with a stick arm mic attached to it. It essentially is what we always make fun of now, because don't ever just buy the $10, $5 Walmart headset. Buy, you don't have to spend an exuberant amount of money, but buy something that is going to be worth the investment and worth going forward with your time. Yeah, I wouldn't say don't force yourself to start right away.
Yeah. But
make a plan. If you need to save a few bucks for something decent or something like that, I would say don't be afraid to do that. But I mean, if you have a hankering to start a podcast, even if it's just to be like 5 minutes to say, you know what, this is my podcast, this is what I'm doing for 5 minutes, take it or leave it. I got plans for the future, and get it started that way.
Yep.
Sure, why not? Who's gonna fault you for that? Nobody.
Nope.
They might go, what the hell was that? And then pay attention to it later when they realize what this kid or this person's going to be doing. But yeah, don't be afraid to start. Don't be afraid to save a few bucks. Like, you can get a decent condenser USB mic for $20-$25 on Amazon. It doesn't take, you don't have to have a Yeti to start by any means. So yeah, don't be afraid. It's
Absolutely.
fun.
Where can the people find your show?
Nerdeffect.com, and then most of the regular podcast outlets. I know things have kind of changed in the landscape of where podcasts are distributed these days, but I think the one that we haven't really gotten onto yet is Spotify.
As long as you don't put any music in it, you should be fine.
Yeah, the big one that we're we're on Stitcher. That's the big one probably for us, and then obviously like iTunes because it's all through a feed. I've come across our podcast on sites that I didn't even know existed before. So whatever you're listening to, it's probably on there, except for Spotify because they require a specific RSS feed, I think, up front, kind of like Stitcher does. Like you have to email Stitcher and be like, hey, here's our RSS feed. Can you add it to your list? And then it takes like a week for them to get back to you and go, okay, you're good.
Yep. Any final thoughts? Anything else you want to say, Steve, before I close it out?
Nope.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us here inside the studio. If you'd like to get in contact with us or leave feedback for the show, there are several ways to do so. Visit the website, geekcastradio.com, where you can listen and comment on all of our posts. Send email to feedback@geekcastradio.com. Here are all the ways you can listen to us nowadays. Apple, Google Podcasts. Leave us reviews there, please. Spotify and any other podcatching client you use. Follow us on Twitter @GeekCastRadio is the network, @It'sStudio2009 is the show. I am @TFG and Mike. Dustin, what is your Twitter if you still have it? Isn't it One Up Your Life still?
No, that's like an old one. I am personally at Dustin VanCour, VanCour, and I have one for Nerd Effect. I just can't remember if it's Nerd Effect Com because somebody took it. Hold on, I'll tell you. But if you just look up Nerd Effect at pretty much anywhere, you'll find it. It's a blue and black logo. Yeah, because it's Nerd Effect is something completely different on. You know what? It's Nerd Effect Pod is what it is. So go to Nerd Effect Pod on Twitter, and you'll find us there. But I'm looking at it now. We haven't posted anything since 2019, so.
Well, the pandemic hit, there. So there's that. What about you, Steve?
You can find me at SCP21.
Become a fan on Facebook. Go to facebook.com/Geekcast Radio Network. You can also search out Studio 2009 Podcast over there as well. Coming up next, Steve and I already recorded this one, so yay! All I have to do is edit it. We are going to be talking about, in episode 21, the Mighty Ducks franchise, the films, and that Disney Plus show. Ugh. For now, I am TFG1 Mike with
Steve Megatron
and Dustin VanCour.
You'll hear us back in the studio soon.
One side, Red.
Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned for Sega.